They say weddings are meant to bring families together, a celebration of love, union, and new beginnings. But sometimes, beneath the flowers, the vows, and the sparkling lights, a wedding can unravel truths long buried, tearing them from the shadows and forcing them into the open. I stood there in that hall, my heart pounding beneath the delicate fabric of my dress, hands lightly clasped, feeling the quiet weight of pride and decades of sacrifice pressing on my shoulders. My son was there, radiant, smiling, unknowing, ready to begin the happiest day of his life. And then, her eyes found mine. My son's bride. Her smile faltered, and in that fraction of a second, the warmth of celebration seemed to falter too. Her voice, trembling with something sharper than nerves, cut across the hall like a cold blade. "Who invited you?" she demanded, each word dripping with disdain and spite. For a heartbeat, I could not breathe. Whispers rippled through the room like an invisible current, the guests leaning forward, unsure how to react. My son froze, his expression a mixture of shock, confusion, and hurt, and I felt the years of silence, the nights of struggle, the sacrifices I had made as a single mother, boil up inside me like a storm that could no longer be contained. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The quiet acceptance of being dismissed, ignored, or undervalued vanished. Pain, pride, and love, all the pieces of a lifetime, surged to the surface. I could no longer remain silent. I reached for the microphone, my hands trembling slightly, yet my voice was steady, calm, and filled with the weight of truth. I looked at everyone in the room, the family, the guests, and the woman who had tried to humiliate me, and began to speak. Because sometimes, the truth does not ruin a day. Sometimes, it frees a lifetime. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed to the Old Folks channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel, and today, you're about to witness one that no one in that hall will ever forget. The hall shimmered like a dream spun from golden light. Chandeliers hung from high ceilings, dripping with crystals that refracted the glow into 1,000 delicate patterns across polished marble floors. Guests swirled gracefully in their finery, laughter rising in soft cascades, mingling with the subtle notes of a string quartet tucked into the corner. The air was perfumed with flowers, roses, lilies, and jasmine, and carried the faint scent of fresh linen from meticulously pressed tablecloths. I entered quietly, my dress simple yet dignified, a reflection of who I was, modest, composed, but proud. My hands clasped together in front of me, trembling ever so slightly, I scanned the room. Each face seemed radiant, each smile a carefully curated expression of happiness, but behind the warmth, I sensed currents of tension, subtle undercurrents of judgment that prickled at the edges of my calm. My son stood at the altar, a figure bathed in soft light, smiling with unguarded joy. I felt the familiar swell of pride in my chest, a deep, complex emotion woven from years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and moments of doubt. My thoughts flickered through memories, the first time I held him in my arms, the scraped knees I had bandaged with trembling hands, the countless nights I spent working while he slept, the tiny victories I celebrated quietly alone. And yet, amid the pride, a strange unease crept in, like a shadow stretching across a sunlit room. I swallowed the lump in my throat and straightened my spine. This day was meant for him. It was a day to celebrate him. And yet, a whisper of doubt lingered. Is everyone here truly happy for us, or is this perfection only a thin mask? I stood frozen for a moment, mesmerized by the way he carried himself, tall, confident, radiant in the vows he was about to take. My chest tightened as a flood of memories hit me, sharp and sweet all at once. I remembered his first words, the trembling steps he took across the living room floor, the tears wiped from his face when disappointment struck him, the nights I spent holding him close while whispering promises of hope. Every sleepless night, every sacrifice, every quiet tear had led to this moment, a moment of triumph, yet tinged with uncertainty. Beneath the joy, a shadow lurked. I could sense the subtle glances of the bride's family, whispers that skimmed the edges of the music, eyes that carried judgments they dared not voice aloud. My heart fluttered, caught between pride and fear, as I realized that not everyone here would understand the years of dedication, the silent labor that had built the foundation of his life. Could they see the story woven into the very fabric of who he was? Could they recognize the love that had guided him to this altar? My lips curved into a smile, though my heart quivered beneath it, uncertain if it would be enough. Why? Then I felt it, a chill slicing through the warmth of celebration. Her eyes found mine. At first, it was a polite, almost ceremonial nod, the kind you offer to a stranger. But then her lips tightened, and the polite facade melted into something colder, disapproval, subtle but sharp, sharp enough to cut through the hum of conversation and music. Her family whispered, low and quick, casting furtive glances my way, the weight of their judgment palpable in the air. I felt the hall shrink, the space between guests seeming to compress, as if the warmth and laughter had been replaced by a suffocating tension. I drew myself up, shoulders back, summoning every ounce of quiet dignity I had honed over decades. Laughter and music seemed to recede into a soft murmur, replaced by the almost tangible sense of expectation and scrutiny. A question gnawed at me as I held my gaze. Is this the world my son will inherit, one that judges the past, the sacrifices, and the love that built him? In that instant, I realized that today, a day I had imagined as pure joy, might test everything, my pride, my patience, my love for my son. And yet, a quiet determination settled in my chest. No matter the whispers, no matter the looks, I would not shrink. I would stand, because this was my son's day, and I had earned my place in it. The room was a symphony of laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft shuffle of guests settling into their seats. Rows of chairs stretched toward the altar, perfectly aligned, each draped with crisp white cloth and decorated with satin ribbons. I approached my assigned seat, my heart tightening as I noticed its location, tucked quietly in a corner, almost invisible, away from the center of celebration. The bride's family had made sure I would not sit near my son or the front row. Instead, I was placed where my presence could be barely noticed. The soft hum of conversation felt distant as I took my seat, the polished floor beneath my shoes reflecting the sparkling chandeliers above. Each movement of guests around me seemed to highlight my isolation, the delicate brush of a skirt, the echo of laughter, the murmurs of greetings exchanged without me. I felt a quiet ache in my chest, the sting of exclusion cutting sharper than any harsh word could. My hands gripped the edge of my chair subtly, reminding myself to breathe, to maintain composure. Could they really not see the years of love, sacrifice, and devotion that had brought my son to this day? The subtle dismissal felt intentional, calculated, and oppressed against my pride like a weight I could not shake. As the ceremony began, I tried to focus on the joy surrounding my son. But every so often, I caught snippets of conversation, a whisper here, a muttered comment there. The father of the bride leaned close to a guest seated near me, his voice low but sharp. "I don't know why she insisted on coming," he said, his tone laced with subtle disdain, his words dripping with judgment. "It's unnecessary. It's best she stays out of this." The word sliced through me like a cold wind, leaving a hollow ache where warmth and celebration should have been. I could feel the eyes of nearby guests flick toward me briefly before averting, uncomfortable with the tension but unwilling to intervene. Each murmured comment, each dismissive glance, seemed to shrink the space I occupied in the room, making me feel as though I were a shadow of myself, present, but invisible, unwanted. My chest ached with the weight of it, the sting of rejection amplified by the knowledge that my son, the reason I was here, had no power over their cold judgments. Could a single moment of disrespect undo a lifetime of love? I glimpsed my son as he approached the back of the room, his eyes scanning mine with a mixture of worry and confusion. He leaned down slightly, lowering his voice, trying to offer reassurance. "Mom, it's okay," he whispered, his tone carrying both apology and helplessness. "Don't worry about them. I just want you to be here." I smiled faintly, the gesture hiding the storm of emotions roiling inside me, hurt, anger, and a desperate longing for recognition. His words were meant to soothe, but they only reminded me of the delicate position I occupied, a mother, a guardian, a provider, and yet suddenly treated like an intruder. My gaze swept the room again, noting the subtle nods, the quiet whispers, the judging eyes that followed my every move. The dissonance between my son's love and the world's judgment weighed heavily on me. Could I stay silent much longer, watching those who knew nothing of my sacrifices treat me with disdain? Something inside me shifted, a quiet ember of resolve igniting beneath layers of hurt and pride. Perhaps it was time to stop hiding, to let the truth, long buried, finally speak. The music seemed to falter, as though it too had sensed the weight of the moment, and the hum of conversation dwindled to a hushed murmur. She stepped toward me, the polished floor reflecting the precise angles of her posture, her gown swishing with deliberate elegance, but her eyes held a sharpness that made the air itself feel brittle. The warmth of the hall, the laughter, the soft clinking of glasses, the fragrant scent of roses and lilies, all seemed to fade into a distant echo. She looked at me with an intensity that made me feel as though she were trying to unravel every stitch of my dignity with a single glance. I met her gaze steadily, refusing to show the tremor in my hands or the flutter in my chest. The world seemed to slow, the chandelier lights above flickering ever so slightly, casting long shadows that stretched toward us like silent witnesses. Around us, guests sensed the shift, whispers hushed abruptly, forks hovered over plates, and even the servers froze mid-step, as if holding their breath. Every eye in the room turned to watch, aware that something was about to unfold, though no one knew what. I drew in a slow, measured breath, feeling the weight of every year of sacrifice, every sleepless night, every silent tear I had shed in raising my son alone. This was the moment that demanded strength, I thought, the moment when silence was no longer enough. Her voice cut through the silence like a knife glinting under the chandelier light. "You weren't even invited," she said, trembling slightly, but each word was edged with deliberate spite. The air seemed to stiffen, carrying her words to the farthest corners of the hall, bouncing off the walls and crystal chandeliers, making them shimmer like accusatory eyes. Gasps rippled through the crowd, delicate as the flutter of a bird's wings, yet heavy with disbelief. The bride's lips curved ever so slightly, the faintest hint of triumph glinting in her expression, a predator sensing the vulnerability of her prey. My chest tightened, and I felt the familiar ache of injustice pressing into my ribs. Memories flooded my mind, the nights I had stayed awake worrying over my son, the countless sacrifices no one had acknowledged, the long hours I had labored silently to ensure his happiness. Every insult, every dismissive glance, had been stored somewhere deep inside me, ready to ignite when the time was right. I let the words hang in the air, heavy and deliberate, giving myself a moment to feel their sting before responding. Around me, the hall seemed suspended in anticipation. Even the flowers smelled different, sharper somehow, the scent mingling with tension, as if the room itself was aware that a story long hidden was on the verge of being revealed. Then came the silence, thick, almost tangible, wrapping the room in a blanket of stillness. Whispers ceased, conversations froze mid-sentence, and even the music seemed to falter, leaving only the soft, collective inhale of hundreds of people sensing something monumental. My son's eyes found mine, confusion and hurt mingling with a silent plea. What should I do? How do I respond? I could see the internal struggle in his gaze, the conflict between loyalty to his bride and the unspoken recognition of everything I had done for him. Around us, the guests' expressions shifted. Some faces reflected shock, others curiosity, some embarrassment at witnessing the first public fracture of what was supposed to be a perfect wedding day. Her family stiffened, rigid as statues, eyes darting to one another, whispers muted but frantic, panic bubbling just beneath the surface. I felt the energy of the hall pressing in, thick and heavy, but beneath it all, a calm determination settled inside me, anchoring every heartbeat. The moment demanded action, to speak, to reveal the truth, to break the illusion that had been meticulously crafted. I straightened my shoulders, taking a slow, deliberate breath. My hands, though slightly trembling, rested firmly on the chair in front of me. The fire in my chest, long restrained, ignited fully now, fed by years of silence, sacrifice, and love that had gone unrecognized. It's time, I thought, to tell them everything, to let the truth shine through the glitter, the lies, and the false smiles. Every stitch of my life, every sleepless night, every moment of quiet devotion for my son demanded to be heard. And in that pregnant pause, with the entire hall waiting and the air thick with tension, I knew this confrontation would change everything. I closed my eyes, and the world of the wedding hall dissolved, replaced by a lifetime of memories, vivid and unyielding. I saw the tiny apartment where we had lived, walls painted in muted colors, furniture worn from years of use, floors scuffed by the hurried steps of a child discovering the world. I remembered mornings when he would wake before dawn, rubbing his sleepy eyes, and I would kneel to tie his shoes, trying to keep the exhaustion from showing on my face. I would carry him to school, lunchbox in hand, heart full of worry and love, praying that I had given him enough to face the day. The nights were no less demanding. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table, bills spread before me, my hand trembling slightly as I signed checks that never seemed to balance. He would curl up beside me, a small weight of trust and innocence, unaware of the fear I carried for both of us. I had learned to stretch every penny, to spin every moment into a lesson of resilience, responsibility, and love. Every scraped knee, every sleepless night, every tear shed quietly in the dark had built the foundation of his life. And yet, as I walked into this grand hall now, I wondered, had all those years of devotion, unseen and unacknowledged by others, been worth it if they could dismiss me with a single glance? I remembered the countless mornings braving the icy winds, coat wrapped tightly, coffee bitter and cold, rushing to jobs that demanded everything yet offered little. There were nights when exhaustion gnawed at me, but I stayed awake to help him with schoolwork, to read stories aloud, to answer questions I barely knew the answers to myself. Birthdays passed with hurried celebrations, often me alone in a corner, pretending joy for him while my body ached from work and worry. Every luxury I denied myself, a new coat, a proper meal, a simple night of rest, was sacrificed so he could thrive, so he could dream without knowing the price behind those dreams. But it wasn't just material sacrifice, it was a life lived in service of another's happiness. I had been both parent and teacher, both comfort and discipline, the silent architect of his character. Every choice I made was calculated, every decision tempered with the weight of love and responsibility. I had endured ridicule, loneliness, and the gnawing anxiety of whether I was doing enough, all without complaint, because his future mattered more than my comfort. And yet, as I watched the wedding from the back, seated away from the center of celebration, I realized that decades of sacrifice could be ignored in a heartbeat by those who saw only the surface. Could love that gave everything truly be recognized by those who had never seen the struggle behind it? The memory of meeting her family was sharp, like a photograph burned into my mind. The room smelled of polished wood, flowers, and the faint trace of expensive perfume. Their smiles were carefully crafted, their eyes calculating, measuring every movement I made. I had walked in with hope, dressed modestly, carrying warmth and goodwill, and yet I felt an almost imperceptible wall rise between us the moment I stepped through the door. Every compliment they gave was thin, every nod mechanical, each word carefully weighed to ensure that I understood my place. Even then, I sensed their hidden motives. They were determined to control the narrative of their daughter's life, to ensure that I, a single mother who had labored in obscurity, would never have influence over their carefully constructed world. Subtle glances, whispered comments, and the ever-present tension in the room conveyed an unspoken message. I was tolerated, but not welcomed. And yet, I did not falter. I smiled, nodded, and spoke politely, masking the churn of emotions that threatened to surface. Their disapproval planted seeds that would grow silently over the years, hidden behind polite conversations and carefully managed appearances, only to bloom on a day like this, the day of my son's wedding. Every whispered slight, every sideways glance, every hint of resentment carried forward like a quiet inheritance, shaping the environment that now sought to marginalize me. And as I sat in the distant corner of the wedding hall, those early memories returned with full force, reminding me that some grudges are patiently nurtured over time, waiting for the right moment to surface. Even as the music swirled softly through the wedding hall and guests laughed, I could feel the weight of a decades-old secret pressing down, heavy and invisible, like a storm gathering just beyond the horizon. Her family had nurtured a carefully hidden truth, one they had hoped would remain buried forever, untouched and unseen. It was not simply resentment or casual dislike, it was fear, an almost palpable dread that the past I represented might surface and upend everything they had constructed around their daughter. They believed time and distance would erase me, that the sacrifices of a single mother would be overlooked, and that my presence today could be erased with a glance. I had known of this secret for years. I had pieced it together quietly, watching their subtle actions, hearing whispers at social gatherings, noting the almost imperceptible glances that carried disapproval like a silent dagger. Every look that suggested I didn't belong, every cold word carefully disguised as politeness, had a reason. They weren't random. They were part of a strategy to marginalize me, to remove my influence, to ensure that my decades of love and devotion had no public acknowledgement. And yet, in their calculation, they had failed to account for one thing: the quiet resilience of a mother who had fought for her child every single day of her life. I could feel their anxiety ripple through the hall even now. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every feigned smile told a story of fear. They feared what I might say, what I might reveal, and most importantly, how the truth could shift the balance of power they had so carefully curated. And in that moment, I realized the stage for revelation was set. The spotlight was not theirs to command, it was mine. Years ago, the secret had slipped like water through a cracked vessel, revealed by a careless word that someone thought I wouldn't hear. At first, I doubted myself, unsure whether to trust my instincts, but the pieces slowly came together like a hidden puzzle revealing its pattern. I realized that their hatred was not personal in the usual sense. It was protective, possessive, a desperate attempt to shield their carefully constructed world from a truth that might undermine it. They feared that my influence over my son, the values I instilled, the love I nurtured, the patience and sacrifices I had given unconditionally, could never be matched by wealth, social standing, or manipulation. I had remembered the first moments of realization vividly. The sharp intake of breath, the flicker of eyes meeting mine, the sudden stiffening of posture, subtle signals that carried more weight than a shouted insult ever could. Their plan had been to push me aside quietly, to diminish me in the shadows, to prevent any disruption to their daughter's perfect narrative of control. But they had underestimated me. I had learned early in life to endure fights, to mask my pain with a smile, to store up strength for moments like this. And now, standing at the very threshold of their carefully staged illusion, I felt the quiet thrill of inevitability. The truth would be spoken, whether they were ready or not. The logic behind their hostility became painfully clear as the years of subtle disrespect formed a pattern. They wanted me absent, invisible, reduced to a footnote in the story of my son's life, a reminder of what they deemed inconvenient and unbecoming. Without me, the wedding would unfold as a flawless picture of social propriety, a tableau carefully staged to showcase their family's control, taste, and superiority. My presence, however, disrupted that fragile balance. Even quietly seated in the hall, my mere existence challenged their narrative. But here was the irony: every attempt to exclude me, every insult and cold gesture, had only made the moment of revelation more potent. By trying to silence me, they had ensured that every eye would be on me when I finally spoke. Every whispered insult, every icy stare, every manipulation aimed to keep me out of sight had only heightened the suspense, creating a tension that was now palpable in the very air of the hall. My heart raced not from fear but from anticipation. The stage was perfectly set, and the time for silence had ended. I could feel the weight of decades pressing into this single moment. Years of sacrifice, love, patience, and quiet endurance had all converged into a single act, standing up and speaking the truth in a place they had hoped I would never be. Their anxiety, their subtle schemes, and their attempts at exclusion had failed. And in that realization, I felt a surge of power, calm and steady, knowing that when the words left my lips, they would shatter the illusions, expose the secret, and finally reclaim the respect that had always been mine. The moment was coming. Every heartbeat, every whisper of air in the hall, every flicker of light seemed to signal its arrival. And I knew, deep in my bones, that nothing could stop the tide of truth now. The air in the hall had shifted imperceptibly but unmistakably, from the light-hearted warmth of celebration to something charged, tense, almost electric. The laughter had faded into hesitant murmurs, whispers bouncing off the walls like restless shadows. Guests craned their necks, eyes scanning me from the back of the room to the center aisle. Their curiosity was palpable, some with suspicion, some with disbelief, others with an almost tangible expectation. The polished wooden floor reflected the chandelier lights like fragments of frozen stars, creating a kaleidoscope of brilliance that contrasted sharply with the growing tension. My son's expression betrayed a storm of emotions, confusion, concern, and that faint trace of fear that one senses when life suddenly shifts from the predictable to the unknown. The bride's family shifted uneasily in their seats, whispers turning into almost imperceptible murmurs, their eyes flicking nervously toward one another. Even the musicians faltered, a slight pause in their strings echoing the collective uncertainty of the room. I could feel the pressure of dozens of pairs of eyes on me, yet beneath it all, there was a current of inevitability. Every step I had taken to this point, every quiet sacrifice, every sleepless night, had led to this exact moment. The question hung in the air, taut and heavy: would they be ready to hear the truth? Or would they recoil, unable to bear it? The microphone stood before me, cold and metallic, but it felt heavier than its mere weight. It carried the collective energy, expectation, and judgment of everyone in the hall. My hands trembled slightly as I brushed the surface, the subtle vibration beneath my fingers sending a shiver up my spine. It wasn't fear alone, it was anticipation, the culmination of decades of endurance, resilience, and love. Every moment of quiet suffering, every insult disguised as politeness, every small attempt to diminish me surged back in my memory, fueling a steady, simmering power beneath the tremor. I inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the mingled scents of flowers, polished wood, and perfumed guests, letting it ground me. My pulse matched the quiet hum of tension in the hall, a rhythm of calm determination beneath the storm. For years, I had remained silent, deflecting cruelty with smiles and grace, preserving my dignity while keeping my son's world intact. But silence had limits, and this was a moment that demanded voice. I straightened my shoulders, letting the weight of the room press against me without breaking my composure. This was no longer about anger, or even confrontation. This was about justice, recognition, and a reclamation of a truth long ignored. Could I convey decades of hidden pain, sacrifice, and love in words? Could the world finally understand what my absence had been forced to conceal? I pressed the microphone to my lips, the metal coal against my skin, and paused for a heartbeat, letting the silence stretch like a taut wire across the hall. I have been silent for too long, I began, my voice calm, measured, yet carrying a fire forged from decades of endurance. Every word vibrated through the hall, settling into the air, weighing on every listener. Guests leaned forward, some in disbelief, some in curiosity, their murmurs fading into an almost sacred quiet. The bride froze, her bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. Her family's murmurs stilled, their composure slipping under the growing gravity of what was about to unfold. I did not come here to ruin anyone's day, I continued, letting the words settle slowly, deliberately. I came here because the truth cannot remain hidden forever. There are stories, sacrifices, and burdens carried silently for years, burdens that must be acknowledged, even when it makes some uncomfortable. Each syllable was deliberate, the cadence measured, like a drumbeat of inevitability. My son's face flickered with emotion, confusion mingling with dawning realization, while the bride's jaw tightened, the first shadow of panic crossing her carefully composed mask. The hall was entirely still now. Even the chandeliers seemed to hang in a suspended breath, reflecting shards of golden light onto the polished floor. The guests were trapped in a moment of suspended tension, leaning toward me collectively, their curiosity palpable, their judgment palpable, their disbelief palpable. Every eye seemed to pierce me, every mind silently questioning, what is the truth she is about to reveal? And I, standing calm yet resolute, knew that the next words would not just shift a wedding, they would shift lives, memories, and the carefully constructed illusions of an entire family. The first seed of reckoning had been planted. Could the world withstand what it was about to hear? Or would the revelation topple everything they had built, leaving only the undeniable weight of truth? The hall was completely still now, every guest frozen in anticipation. The music had ceased, the laughter and clinking of glasses reduced to a distant memory. I took a slow breath, letting the weight of years of silence settle around me. Before this day, I began, my voice calm yet laced with iron, my son was told a story about me that is far from the truth. I could see his bride flinch, the first crack in her polished composure, her lips parting slightly as though to interrupt, but no words came. She was told, I continued, letting each word hang like a dagger in the air, that I was not welcome, that my sacrifices, my love, and my life as a mother were irrelevant, inconvenient, even shameful. The guests murmured softly, leaning toward one another, whispers carrying the disbelief through the room like ripples across water. I could see her father's face tighten, his hands clenching around his chair, while the mother's jaw dropped slightly in shock. The lie had been carefully constructed, whispered in secrecy, polished over time, and delivered to manipulate hearts. And now, here it was, exposed in the hush, unyielding light of truth. I paused, letting the silence swell, the tension so thick it felt like it could be sliced with a knife. Her family, I said slowly, deliberately, has resented me not because of who I am, but because they feared the power of love I gave to the one they call their son-in-law today. My voice carried, filling every corner of the hall. Eyes widened, faces paled, and a collective shiver seemed to pass through the crowd. The bride's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edges of her bouquet, her eyes darting nervously between me and her family. They wanted me distant, I continued, my tone steady yet burning with truth, because they knew that no wealth, no prestige, no carefully constructed story could replace what a mother gives: years of sleepless nights, guidance, patience, and unwavering devotion. They tried to erase me, to diminish me, to render invisible the woman who raised the man they wanted their daughter to marry. But love cannot be erased, and truth, once unearthed, cannot be denied. The murmurs grew louder, though hesitant, like waves crashing against rocks. I felt the electricity of the room, the tension vibrating in every polished surface, every shimmering chandelier. The secret had finally been exposed, and the air was thick with disbelief. Then I let the most profound revelation fall, slow and deliberate, like the final piece of a puzzle snapping into place. "There is something you all need to understand," I said, my voice resonating with authority. "This isn't just about resentment. There is a secret, buried for years, that connects our families in a way that you cannot undo. A truth that, if ignored, would continue to poison relationships and hearts for decades to come." The room seemed to hold its breath, each person leaning forward involuntarily, sensing the gravity of what I was about to disclose. The same lie, the same misunderstanding, has shaped actions, decisions, and feelings across generations, I whispered, my words cutting like glass. I am here not to humiliate, but to illuminate. To reveal the truth that was kept hidden, for selfishness, for pride, for fear. The bride's face turned pale, her eyes wide with panic. Her family froze, each heartbeat audible in the heavy, silent space between us. My son's hand tightened around the armrest, realization dawning on him like a slow, cruel sunrise. And as I stood there, calm but resolute, I could feel the shift, the invisible walls of lies and pretension crumbling in real time. The truth had landed, and its echo would reverberate far beyond this hall, reshaping lives and hearts alike. A sharp intake of breath rose from the crowd, followed by an almost simultaneous collective gasp. Cameras clicked frantically, but even they seemed inadequate to capture the gravity of the revelation. Conversations halted mid-word, glasses paused mid-air, and the floral arrangements seemed to quiver with the tension in the room. The bride sank slightly in her seat, her bouquet slipping from her trembling hands, while her parents' faces betrayed a mixture of fear, shame, and disbelief. My son's eyes, wide and shining with unshed tears, met mine, and in that moment, no words were necessary. The years of hidden sacrifices, of patient endurance, of quiet love, were finally understood, at least by him. The silence that followed was almost sacred, a stillness so heavy it felt like the room itself had stopped breathing. The truth had been spoken, raw and undeniable, and it hung in the air like a dense fog that refused to dissipate. And in that pregnant pause, every person present, the guests, the family, even the bride, was forced to reckon with the reality they had tried to avoid. They had been given a glimpse of what lies beneath appearances, beneath curated smiles, beneath societal facades. And they could not look away. My son froze in place, the bouquet of flowers in his hands trembling slightly as the weight of my words sank in. His eyes widened, pupils dilating as if trying to take in a world that had just been inverted. The carefully built image of his bride, his family, and the narrative he had believed for so long began to fracture before him. Memories, once blurred and forgotten, began to resurface, moments of subtle hints, quiet injustices, half-truths he had brushed aside. I could see his mind racing, processing decades of what he thought he knew, and now questioning every moment. The soft rustle of fabric, the faint clink of his wedding ring, and the distant murmur of guests seemed amplified, each sound stretching into eternity as his realization took root. His mouth opened slightly, as if to speak, but no words emerged, only the trembling of disbelief. Every muscle in his face shifted, from confusion to dawning comprehension, until finally, the slow flame of recognition ignited in his eyes. Could he truly reconcile the daughter-in-law he thought he knew with the web of lies and manipulation that had just been exposed? Images and moments from the past began to assemble themselves in his mind, like puzzle pieces falling into place after years of missing fragments. He remembered fleeting glances of disapproval from the bride's family, their whispered comments he had dismissed as misunderstandings, the subtle dismissals that had always seemed minor at the time. Each memory now carried weight, every overlooked detail transformed into a clear message he had been blind to for far too long. The realization hit him in waves, first shock, then sorrow, then a profound understanding. He saw the sacrifices I had made, the sleepless nights, the countless hours spent shaping his life, guiding him, and protecting him from harm, all contrasted against the carefully cultivated lies fed to him by the very people he had trusted. A deep ache of betrayal spread through him, not toward me, but toward those who had tried to manipulate his perception and rewrite the history he had inherited. Every heartbeat matched the rhythm of dawning clarity, a slow drum of recognition that could not be ignored. Could he confront the truth fully, or would the weight of deception overwhelm him entirely? Finally, his gaze shifted, unwavering and fierce, toward his bride. The bride who had smiled, laughed, and whispered, now sitting rigid, her carefully maintained facade cracking beneath the tidal wave of truth. His eyes, glistening with a mixture of pain, anger, and sorrow, held her in place like a force of nature. The hall itself seemed to pause, every whisper and shuffle fading into a tense silence as all attention focused on the pair. He opened his mouth, and yet no words came immediately, only a sharp intake of breath, trembling slightly, as though the air itself had thickened with the weight of what had been revealed. Slowly, he stepped toward her, each movement deliberate, measured, carrying the full gravity of revelation. How could you?" he finally said, his voice breaking, a combination of disbelief, heartbreak, and quiet fury all woven together. The guests leaned forward, hanging on every syllable, the air electric with tension. She could not answer, frozen by the immensity of exposure, her eyes darting nervously toward her family, who now seemed powerless, their previous arrogance stripped away by the force of my words. In that charged moment, the son's understanding crystallized. He had been shielded from truth for years, misled by lies and manipulation, yet now, the veil had been lifted. The people around him, his bride, her family, the guests, were no longer the narrative he had believed. And as he stood, staring at her, realization flooded every nerve. Love built on lies could never stand, and the woman who had raised him, the mother he had always trusted, was the true pillar of integrity and sacrifice in his life. The chandeliers above cast fractured light over the polished floor, creating shifting patterns that danced like the chaos unfolding below. The bride's face had turned a violent shade of crimson, each pulse visible against her pale skin, as if the truth itself had burned her from the inside. She opened her mouth, trembling, and spat out, "That's not true." "How dare you?" But the words trailed off into a trembling whisper. Her voice lacked the power it once carried, reduced now to desperation and fear. She looked to her family for rescue, for affirmation that they could somehow rewrite the narrative in her favor, but their faces betrayed them, panic, disbelief, shame, all etched deep and impossible to hide. Her mother clutched her pearls so tightly that they dug into her trembling hands, knuckles whitening with tension. Her father's face was taut, jaw clenched so rigidly that even the slightest tremor could have broken the porcelain calm he had cultivated. Their eyes flicked nervously toward the guests, the son, and then back to me, as though searching for some magical reprieve from the storm I had unleashed. They whispered, muttered, and shifted uneasily, but the story, carefully constructed over months, over years, had been exposed, torn to shreds in a few measured sentences. My son's gaze was fixed upon me, steady and unwavering, and in that gaze, the bride and her family felt a force far stronger than anger or outrage, the quiet weight of truth that could no longer be denied. A ripple began to move through the guests, tentative at first, almost inaudible, like the whisper of wind before a thunderstorm. Then, as the realization sank in, the whispers grew into a low, chaotic hum, a storm of shock and confusion rising from every corner of the hall. Conversation ceased mid-word, glasses paused mid-air, and heads turned in unison, straining to understand, to witness, to process the magnitude of what had been revealed. Cameras clicked frantically, flashes igniting in bursts that caught faces frozen between disbelief, horror, and awe. Some guests leaned toward their neighbors, mouths opening and closing in silent astonishment, eyebrows arching as they exchanged urgent, bewildered glances. Others stared straight ahead, unable to tear their eyes from the confrontation unfolding, as if watching a slow-motion collapse of a carefully constructed world. The clinking of cutlery on plates seemed to echo like nervous tremors. The faint hum of the hall's air conditioning sounded now like the steady pulse of a tension so dense it could be felt in every bone. The atmosphere had shifted entirely, vibrating with the electricity of revelation. Everyone present, friends, relatives, acquaintances, strangers, was suddenly drawn into a web of truth, caught in the moment when the past, carefully hidden, collided violently with the present. I inhaled slowly, letting the charged silence expand, letting each heart in the room hang on every word. "I am here," I said deliberately, my voice calm yet firm, not as an uninvited guest, not as an inconvenience, not as someone to be dismissed or silenced, but as the mother who raised your son. The woman who poured every ounce of her being into shaping the life he lives today. And the lies you have relied upon to diminish me, to make yourselves feel secure, have ended here, now, in front of every witness present. The hall went utterly still, as though reality itself had paused. The bride gasped sharply, her bouquet slipping entirely from her hands, petals scattering onto the floor in a fragile, almost symbolic display of the shattered illusion she had built. Her parents' panic intensified visibly. They leaned toward each other, whispering hurriedly, faces pale, fingers twisting nervously. Even guests who had remained neutral now shifted uneasily, leaning forward as the gravity of the moment settled in. The weight of decades of sacrifice, devotion, and love, once invisible and overlooked, now pressed heavily upon every eye in the room. All at once, the air seemed to thrum with tension, a low, vibrating energy that radiated outward, touching every person, every surface, every delicate detail of the wedding hall. The chandeliers seemed to dim, the polished floors reflecting more than light, they reflected shock, disbelief, and the undeniable force of truth. My son's eyes, shining with unshed tears, met mine, and in that gaze, the bride, her family, and the assembled guests felt the unyielding power of honesty, patience, and love, forces no amount of manipulation could ever erase. For a heartbeat, or perhaps an eternity, time itself seemed suspended. Conversations had ceased, whispers had vanished, music had been silenced, and even the air held its breath. The lies, the pretenses, the careful illusions that had governed this day were obliterated, replaced by the raw, unfiltered reality of a truth long suppressed. And in that sacred, trembling silence, one question lingered in the minds of everyone present: could they ever unsee what had been revealed? Could this family, this wedding, ever return to the illusion they had believed for so long? The moment my words settled in the air, it felt as though time itself had stopped. The laughter, clinking of glasses, and soft murmurs of conversation evaporated into a heavy, almost sacred silence. Every eye in the hall seemed to lock onto me, wide with astonishment, some filled with admiration, others with guilt or shock. The chandeliers above reflected tiny stars onto the polished floors, but the brilliance felt hollow now, a stark contrast to the tension that gripped the room. Faces frozen mid-expression stared back at me, the bride's mouth slightly open, her family leaning toward each other in frantic whispers, guests leaning forward in disbelief, trying to grasp the magnitude of what had just been spoken. I could hear the subtle intake of breath from the crowd, a collective shiver that seemed to pulse through the air like a living entity. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing every reaction, the bride's eyes widening in disbelief, the mother of the bride gripping her pearls so tightly her hands shook, the father's jaw clenched as though he were trying to bite down the panic that threatened to escape. My son stood frozen, processing everything, his hands gripping the edge of the podium like a lifeline. The hall was caught between two worlds, the celebration that had begun the day and the raw truth that had violently intruded. Every guest, every relative, every friend felt it, the tectonic shift of reality breaking through illusion. And in that moment, one unspoken question hovered over all of us: could a family survive the eruption of truths long buried, or would this shatter everything they believed in? Time seemed to stretch as he turned toward me. I could see the conflict in his eyes, a storm of emotions flickering across his face: shock, betrayal, fear, love, and finally, understanding. Memories must have cascaded through his mind, the sleepless nights, my tireless care, the sacrifices no one else had ever acknowledged. He remembered every lesson, every whisper of encouragement, every tear I had shed for him, every quiet act of love that had shaped his life. And now, faced with the bride's lies and the false narratives her family had woven, he had to decide what mattered more: appearances, obligations, or the undeniable truth of his mother's love. Slowly, deliberately, he moved forward. Each step was measured, filled with weight and purpose. The bride's eyes sought his approval, her hands reaching as if to stop him, but he did not falter. He reached out and took my hand, gripping it gently yet firmly, a lifeline, a pledge, a declaration. "Mom," he whispered, voice catching but unwavering, "I understand now. I see the truth. I will not let lies dictate my life, not today, not ever." The room seemed to exhale collectively, the tension so thick it had been tangible moments before now dissolving with his choice. Guests leaned forward, some gasping, others whispering rapidly, as the gravity of his words sank in. The bride's carefully curated world cracked around her, and even her family could not shield her from the truth that had taken hold. For the first time, I saw a sense of clarity and resolve in my son that mirrored my own, a shared understanding that some truths were worth facing, no matter the cost. I began to gather my things slowly, deliberately, savoring the gravity of the moment. Each movement was a quiet testament to decades of endurance, sacrifice, and love. The murmurs followed me, a soft symphony of astonishment, as I walked toward the exit, my posture tall, my steps measured, carrying with me the dignity that had never been denied, only overlooked. Outside, the evening air greeted me like a gentle embrace, fragrant with flowers from the garden surrounding the hall, cool and crisp, washing away the tension that had clung to my skin. I paused, glancing back through the grand windows, catching sight of the bride frozen in disbelief, her family in frantic disarray, and my son standing strong and resolute, finally freed from the shadows of deception. The music, once a joyful background, now drifted faintly, almost as a distant echo of the chaos and resolution that had just unfolded. I realized then that I had not left as an uninvited guest, as she had so cruelly implied, but as a woman finally recognized, fully seen, her truth undeniable and her voice finally heard. Every step into the night was liberating, a release of decades of silence and patience finally rewarded. The moonlight fell gently across my path, casting elongated shadows that stretched behind me like memories of the past now set free. I understood, in the deepest part of my being, that courage, honesty, and unwavering love had the power to change lives, mend broken bonds, and restore the honor of those who quietly carried the weight of family for a lifetime. And as I disappeared into the quiet embrace of the evening, I realized something profound: the day would be remembered not for the wedding itself, nor for any fleeting celebration, but for the moment when truth pierced illusion, when silence gave way to recognition, and when love, patient, enduring, and unshakable, claimed its rightful place. The music might resume, the guests might chatter, and life would continue, but in that night, in that hall, something irreversible had been set into motion. A family had been confronted with its own reality, a mother had been vindicated, and a son had chosen truth over comfort, forever altering the course of all their lives. And in the quiet aftermath, peace finally found me. They say truth ruins weddings. But in reality, it does not destroy love itself. What it truly shatters are the illusions we build around love, the fragile walls of expectation, the carefully constructed stories we tell ourselves to feel safe, to feel accepted, to believe that appearances can shield us from the chaos of reality. On that day, I did not speak to punish anyone, nor to humiliate or seek revenge. I spoke to heal, to tear away the veil of secrecy and finally bring light to truths that have been hidden for far too long. Every word I spoke carried the weight of decades, sleepless nights spent worrying, silent sacrifices made in quiet despair, love given freely and without recognition, and the patient endurance of a heart that refused to break even when it was overlooked, ignored, or dismissed. My son may have lost the bride he thought would be his lifelong partner, but in that loss, he gained something infinitely greater: clarity, understanding, and the undeniable knowledge of his own history, his own roots, and the unwavering love of the woman who had shaped him. The revelation did not only free me, it freed him, too. It allowed him to see the truth behind the masks and pretenses, to understand the sacrifices made for him, to confront the lies that had been woven around him, and to finally make choices grounded in honesty and integrity. In that hall, I saw, with heartbreaking clarity, the power of truth to cut through decades of deception, to rearrange the very foundations of relationships, and to demand recognition for what has long been hidden. I walked out of that hall not as an uninvited guest, as she had so cruelly called me, but as a woman finally seen, acknowledged, and respected, someone whose presence, whose love, and whose courage could not be ignored any longer. And in that moment, I understood a profound and universal truth. Sometimes it takes the sting of a single cruel sentence, the sharpness of a bitter accusation, to break the silence that imprisons truth, and to release what has been confined by fear, shame, or misunderstanding for decades. Sometimes, the pain of one moment is the necessary key that unlocks a lifetime of liberation. I paused outside the hall for a final glance. The music that had once filled the space with joyous celebration was now distant, softened by the night, almost irrelevant compared to the tremor of revelation that had just passed through. The guests inside were still murmuring, still processing, still attempting to reconcile the layers of truth with the illusions they had believed for so long. But I knew, I could feel deep in my bones, that nothing in that room would ever be the same again. The air itself seemed lighter, charged with the weight of honesty and the silent triumph of justice long overdue. The night embraced me as I stepped into the cool, fragrant air. The breeze carried the subtle scent of flowers from the wedding gardens, mingling with the quiet hum of the city beyond, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged inside the hall. In that moment, I felt a softness, a liberation, a quiet joy that was entirely mine, a feeling that recognition and truth can bring, untethered from approval, applause, or public validation. For the first time in decades, I felt the peace that comes from releasing the burden of silence, the satisfaction of standing in the light of your own integrity, and the profound calm that arises when your sacrifices, your love, and your very existence are finally honored. I realized then that real victory is not always loud or celebrated. It is quiet, invisible to the world, yet monumental to the soul. It is found in the courage to speak when it is easier to remain silent, in the patience to endure when injustice surrounds you, and in the unwavering belief that love and truth will prevail, even when all seems lost. That evening, as I walked further into the night, leaving behind the hall and all its echoes, I understood that I had not merely survived the cruelty, humiliation, and lies, I had risen above them. My heart, long weighed down by secrecy and sacrifice, was finally free. And in that freedom, in that still, fragrant night, I knew something deep and unshakable: truth, love, and courage are timeless forces. They do not vanish with the end of a ceremony or the close of a door. They linger, persistent and enduring, shaping lives, mending hearts, and restoring dignity long denied. I breathed in the night air, feeling the chill and warmth intertwine, and smiled softly. The music had stopped, the guests would eventually leave, and life would continue beyond those walls. Yet in my soul, a profound peace had settled, a peace earned through endurance, claimed through courage, and preserved through love. That night, I walked away not only as a mother seen, but as a woman fully alive, fully acknowledged, and finally, irrevocably free.